In our country, children were born at home, are born, and will be born. The experience of childbirth for every woman is unforgettable, indelible, and can't be removed from her memory. It's there for a lifetime. I don't want to survive a birth just so that I would rather forget it. To give birth anywhere I choose is my natural and basic right, and it cannot be limited by anything. I choose home birth because I choose health for myself and my children. Physical and psychological health. I choose the considerate attitude toward birth, sensitivity to my desires and respect for my rights. I choose the partners I need, no unnecessary people with their desire to help me. I believe in myself as a woman, as a mother, and I wish to bring a child into this world as I feel in my heart. I chose home birth because childbirth is a part of my private life, and it's up to me to decide where and with whom my child is born. I give birth at home because I do not want to transform my childbirth and the postpartum into a battlefield for everything that is important for me. I want to give birth in peace, quiet, and on my territory. I choose home birth not because it is fashionable now or because someone forced it on me. I choose home birth because it is a conscious decision that cannot be imposed from the outside, which comes from somewhere deep inside. This is a responsibility that parents are aware of and ready to take on. I want others to be aware of this. I want this to be understood and accepted. Women who give birth to their children at home do not impose anything on anyone. I choose home birth because I could completely surrender to my inner sensations of the birth flow, feel silence, calmness, security, and freedom. I in no way urge women to give birth at home. I do not think that giving birth in a maternity hospital is bad, and I have a lot of respect for doctors. I'm a doctor myself. After my first childbirth, the doctors helped me solve a certain problem. But I support the fact that every woman has the right to choose where her child will be born, and those women who want to give birth at home, and the state of their health and pregnancy allows them, could do it safely, accompanied by a qualified certified professional. And perhaps, if there was such a professional in my first birth, then I would not have had this particular problem at all. I chose home birth not because the doctor did not approve my birth plan, but because she promised one thing. She said literally, everything will be the way you want. But in fact, there was a routine amniotomy, despite my refusal, and she used the forbidden Christeller maneuver, despite the fact that there were absolutely normal, active, wonderful childbirth. Nothing threatened the life and health of me and my baby. Nevertheless, they used the fundal pressure for some unknown reason. Despite my written refusal of active management of the third stage of labor, the placenta was pulled out manually. I was denied a physiological third period, and therefore, having pulled out the placenta, they provoked bleeding. I believe the maternity hospital should not be a place where a woman should fight for the right to give birth the way she wants. And there would be nothing terrible if the doctors allowed me to give birth as I later gave birth at home, on my second and third births, completely calm. In Ukraine, the number of out-of-hospital births is growing every year. This is noted not only by practicing home birth midwives, but these data can be calculated with a scrupulous study of statistics from official state websites. Miracle in the Heart International Social Project and the journalist Atanaya Ta carried out a small study, the results of which amazed us. Will they amaze you? The information and analytical web portal Green Post Media, specializing in covering topical issues in medicine, published on March 1, 2021, the results of our calculations of the number and percentage of out-of-hospital births in Ukraine from 2008 to 2019. There are no statistics on babies born at home as a separate category on the official websites of the Ministry of Health and the State Statistics Service of Ukraine. So the media, doctors, and medical officials, and we ourselves, have been talking about a pitiful 1% of home births for many years. The histogram table shown in the article demonstrates 6% of out-of-hospital deliveries in Ukraine in 2019. We used the scheme that is used in European countries to calculate the percentage of out-of-hospital births. You can find the data on the total number of live births in Ukraine by year. In the statistics of the Center for Medical Statistics of the Ministry of Health of Ukraine, Form 21, there is the number of deliveries in medical facilities throughout Ukraine and the number of stillbirths. Thus, from the total number of live births in Ukraine, you can subtract the number of live births in medical facilities and get the number and percentage of live births out of hospital in Ukraine. By the way, in the USA, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Germany, and Holland, this information can be found in the public domain on the official government statistical websites. So here is the situation in Ukraine for out-of-hospital births compared to other countries where home birth midwifery has long been legalized. It should be clarified that in other countries, out-of-hospital births are not only home births, but also births in birthing centers and birthing hotels, where purely midwives and doulas work without physicians.
My 3 children were born at home. It was the most normal thing for me. Never 1 second I thought that home birth could be risky. I've never had fear, only trust. Probably because home birth was still rather normal in Holland, my birth country, and also in my family of origin. And we must not forget that home birth was normal in the whole world before the massive medicalization and industrialization and plastification of birth and the use of synthetic oxytocin and of so-called easy, safe cesarean techniques and all kinds of artificial birth devices, which brought to the global normalization of hospital birth and to the global conviction that hospital is the safest place to give birth. It is incredible. Humanity assisted in less than a century in the whole world to the loss of home birth as the physiological norm and place for giving birth. What I find shocking and not aligned to the modern knowledge of microbiome and primal health is that still now home birth continues to be labeled as too risky by the health situations and by most of birth professionals and by the community. The new scientific unifying framework of the 21st century, emerging from several illuminating disciplines like microbiology, epigenetics, endocrinology, human ethology, etc., considering human primal and global health, offered humanity better insights about what made human birth more difficult and riskful, and breastfeeding more difficult and so prematurely abandoned, and primal health weaker and weaker in the human species along the human history. And it even manages to explain why several planned or not planned home births still end up in medicalized hospital births or have negative outcomes in the home birth, because the basic needs of the woman in labor and the mother and baby in the hour after birth are still extremely misinterpreted, underestimated, and extremely disturbed.
Even the best physicians cannot give birth for you, they cannot breathe for you, they cannot push for you, and they cannot feel your body. Surely there are women who want a medicalized delivery from the very beginning, or they have physiological problems and therefore need the presence of doctors. Such women should give birth in a maternity hospital. Ukraine has every opportunity to catch up with European countries in which home birth midwifery is legalized. And the myths about ambulances are just myths, because not a single, even the most highly developed government, can financially withstand the maintenance of an ambulance in every yard where home births take place. Women abroad feel the support of the government in their choice. A healthcare professional is present during the home birth and he or she calls an ambulance if something goes wrong. Ukrainian women have the same right.
In the majority of developed countries, home birth, with midwifery provided at home, is supported by obstetricians in the central hospitals because they understand and they know the research shows that this is safe for mothers and babies. And the outcomes are far better. They have fewer interventions, they have fewer cesarean sections, and the women and babies are fitter and happier.
I can speak for London, since I only work here, and there are 29 birth centers here. Only 3 of them are freestanding. I think it matters, because there are just so many hospitals in the city of London itself, and it's quite common for them to have a birth center. I don't see the difference between freestanding and hospital-affiliated birth centers, because a birth center implies a separate structure and its own hierarchy. There is a separate entrance and exit, and there are employees who follow their own protocols. The decision to give birth in the birth center is made by the family from the 36th week, when it will be noted in the woman's notes that the pregnancy is outside the risk zone and she is attached to one of the birth centers. Of course, we realize that this can change at the time of labor. The family has the right to come and knock at any birth center and hospital, but the birth center also has the right to accept or not accept her, depending on what the indicators are and what records the woman has. It's very pleasant to see the practice when a woman is in the high-risk category, but an individual conversation is still being conducted with her, and these factors are considered separately, and the decision is made on the basis that the choice remains with the woman. That is, certain risks are explained to her. She is given a recommendation from the healthcare system where it is better for her to give birth, but still, the right remains with her. Once again, I emphasize that the family must understand that the birth center has the last word to accept a woman to take this responsibility upon itself or not. There are now 62 birth centers across England, and probably this is due to the fact that there are simply not as many hospitals in the regions as in London. Childbirth at home is not only legal, but also strongly supported by the healthcare system. The peculiarity of giving birth at home is that the risk of responsibility is distributed, so more responsibility lies with the parents. Let me give you an example. In order for the healthcare trust to approve a home birth, this also happens by week 36, midwives will come to the family's home to check the space where they will come during the birth and be responsible. They also bring essential medicines and a birth kit. Everything else is brought in at the time of labor by the team that will accompany the delivery. Despite the fact that the healthcare system must approve home birth and a woman will have it in her records, the last word remains with the family itself. Because the mentality and attitude towards childbirth in England, if briefly described, is that of consumer rights. The NHS acts as a service provider, and the protocols it follows are considered guidelines. That is, it can consider the risks and make recommendations. However, its responsibility includes providing obstetrics and assistance even to a family that is at high risk. Independent midwives work according to their own protocols in the national healthcare system. Their experience differs from that of home birth and hospital midwives. I will say right away that today in England, it is very difficult to meet midwives who have the privilege of accompanying childbirth in hospitals. If independent midwives come for a home birth and there is a transfer, of course not to the birth center but to the hospital, then the midwife has the right to follow this family, but only as a supporter. She's not qualified to give any advice in childbirth. This responsibility is transferred to the hospital midwife. In my practice, home birth midwives are women who are not only accustomed to natural, physiological childbirth, but also support them in every possible way. I remind parents all the time, and I see this in every birth, that the family has the last word. How prepared the family is, how much it understands and knows its preferences, how ready it is to allow the inviolability of its birth. In home births, two oppositely unfolding situations can be observed when a home midwife is invited and made to understand that her services will be used if there is a need for it. Then the midwife sits and observes. She has a passive behavior, and no matter how much she likes or dislikes it. And another situation is when the home midwife comes and the family asks her to actively participate in the birth, asks for her support and advice. There are home birth midwives in Slovenia. An application can be made to become a home midwife, and if she meets a number of criteria, she is licensed to become an independent professional and can accompany women in childbirth at home. Surely, there are also a certain number of exceptions for those pregnancies that cannot be accompanied in the form of home birth midwifery, but which must necessarily take place in a hospital. How was the interaction with my home midwife and the hospital organized? On my last visit to the hospital, before leaving for home birth, I was asked to call the maternity ward when labor begins to warn the doctors that labor had begun, so that the obstetric team would be aware that nearby, I live about 25 minutes drive from the hospital, a home birth is occurring. And there is a probability that if something gets out of control and you really need some medical aid, then a woman may come to them in an emergency and they will need to react quickly. And I was also asked to make the same call when the labor was over safely and say that everything is in order. And also that the obstetric hospital team knows that the probability that someone will come to them is over. It seems to me that just this kind of interaction between home midwives and staff in clinics, such cooperation, is the best option for helping women in childbirth in all countries. I made my decision to give birth at home absolutely consciously. The first childbirth took place in the city of Zaporozhye, in maternity hospital number 4. Unfortunately, this was a bad experience. I was prepared, took all the courses in the prenatal clinic. However, in the hospital, I met a lot of rudeness, and to my request not to inject me with any injections, the doctors responded by simply twisting my arms and giving me an injection. They really wanted me to give birth on their shift. It was November 7, a national holiday at that time. As a result, I had many perineal ruptures, which doctors sewed without anesthesia, as they could not get into my vein due to their worries. On the third day, some unclear medical procedure was done on the child, which was not written down, neither in the medical record nor in the discharge form, nor explained verbally. So we guessed that probably the umbilical cord was cut again. The child was discharged with severe allergies and cried for a very long time. My health was also severely undermined. My temperature was 40 degrees for a whole month. My parents wanted to sue after this birth, but since the midwife came up at the end of the delivery and apologized, we did not sue. However, before the next birth, I thought about where to have my birth. We met a midwife from a long line of midwives who possess great knowledge and great strength. We delivered 3 children with her. One girl in the Black Sea, about 3 kilograms. While the doctors predicted only a C-section for me after such a difficult first birth, I gave birth to all 3 children without a single complication. The other 2 children were born in Spain. A girl, also about 3 kilograms, and a boy about 5 kilograms. They were born wonderfully and absolutely healthy. In Spain, it was very easy to organize the governmental registration of children. We completed it in 1 day, while in Ukraine it was very problematic. In Spain, at a prenatal clinic, when we said we wanted a home birth, we were given a list of midwives who help women before and during delivery, as well as a few weeks after birth. We received child allowance from the Spanish government after the registration in the amount of 2,000 euros for each child, for which we are also very grateful. I gave birth to my first daughter in the hospital. It was a negative experience for me. My husband and I were preparing very seriously for the birth of our second child, and we decided to give birth at home with the support of a doctor we knew. It was a very important decision. We thought everything over for the little things. We lovingly arranged the place where we wanted to give birth, and we had a very wonderful experience. Even those people who were not very supportive of our idea of home birth were delighted and congratulated us on the birth of our second child. Therefore, we gave birth to the third child at home. I gave birth to my fourth child in the sea. This was also a special condition because it expands the concept of home probably to the size of the planet. The whole earth is your home. The sea helped me. The warm water was wonderfully relaxing. The beauty of nature, every pebble helped. However, one needs to come to this, to mature into it. We also gave birth to our fifth and sixth children at home. I am a supporter of home birth. Actually, I have a heritage of midwifery. My grandmother, great-grandmother, and great-great-grandmother delivered babies. And this knowledge of how to give birth, how to carry pregnancy, is probably imprinted in my brain. I also pass this knowledge on to other women. I really believe that there will be as many women as possible who believe in themselves, in the wisdom of the female body, in the fact that most women can safely give birth to their children at home. Many wonderful poets, painters, scientists, and artists were born at home. I know a lot of examples of home births where everything was wonderful. Of course, it is obviously very important to prepare for this event. I began to prepare for the birth of my children long before my first pregnancy, and I prepared very responsibly throughout my pregnancy. I went to another country to attend workshops with Michel Adent. I read a lot of foreign scientific literature, and I was perfectly prepared and had a positive attitude. I spent the major part of the birth at home, and we went to the maternity hospital already pushing. My husband was not allowed into the hospital, although we were ready with all documents. They started to insult me from the doorway. They refused to allow me to give birth in an upright position. They gathered their whole herd, and the one goal was to drive me into the obstetrical bed. At my request to give me my child, they did not give it to me, but they laughed and said, "Nobody will give you your child." They completely put me to sleep without my permission to sew me up after an episiotomy. I was completely out of it. When I came to my senses and asked, "Where is my baby?" I was told, "Your baby's gone." Do you understand how a mom perceives that? I was lucky that I managed to assess the condition of my baby without even touching it, because I have such an experience as a pediatrician. And after they realized that I was aware of something, they told me that my child was in intensive care. They told my husband the same thing. As a result, I found my child in an ordinary ward at night. It was taken there immediately from the delivery room. I gave birth to a child 20 minutes after I arrived at the hospital. The obstetricians only had to put their hands out to catch him. And I had such psychological trauma that people can do such atrocities against other people that when I saw pregnant girls, I cried. And this was when I already had a 6-month-old baby in my arms and I had recovered a bit from childbirth. I felt sorry for these moms-to-be because I knew where they were going to give birth. And when the time came of the second pregnancy, I had no doubts at all that I would give birth to my next child at home, and that only some threat to the life or health of my child or me could force me to go to the hospital. Therefore, for the next 3 pregnancies, I prepared even more because I knew that I would give birth at home. All these births were wonderful and fulfilling. You can make films about them, motivating other women and healing their mental traumas. With each child, I understood that in our country, this is the most favorable place for the birth of healthy children, so that they remain as healthy as possible. When I was preparing for my first childbirth, I could not even imagine that you can give birth somewhere else, like at home. Why do that? However, when I had the experience of childbirth in the hospital, it was humiliation from the nurse, from the doctors, when the doctor insisted on inducing me when there was no indication for it, when they talked to me rudely in the delivery room saying, "Shut up," while I was just singing, "ah," to make my contractions easier. I felt very unprotected, very uncomfortable. All in all, my childbirth went well, but getting ready for the second birth, I remembered the sarcastic phrase, "Where did you come from that you're so smart? Go back there to give birth." I felt that my child wants to be born at home. My husband and I found a midwife and decided to have a home birth. It went well, but it was not easy for me. Childbirth is still not easy female work. The third birth occurred also at home. Everything was fine too. It was unpleasant that there was aggression from the prenatal clinic, and during the registration of the child, as if I did something terrible, I gave birth to a human. And everything is fine. Doesn't this deserve any support? Home birth is not necessary for every woman. Someone gives birth well in the hospital, and that's good. But there are children who choose to be born at home. There are women who want to give birth at home, just under normal conditions. Every woman has the right to choose where to give birth. I want as many people as possible to realize that women who want to give birth at home are not fanatics expecting an orgasmic birth. They are women who want to give birth in normal conditions, safely, with support and with love.
At one point, early in my medical career, while I was attending a birth in the hospital, I asked myself that there has to be a better way to treat a woman in labor. There has to be a better way to welcome a baby into this world. And I started looking, and I found the answers in the midwifery model, the midwifery path. My 3 children were born at home. My wife and myself felt safe at home. But the point is that a woman is gonna give birth where she feels safe, where she feels respected, where she feels that nobody's controlling her, and we will act if it is necessary. Now you see that the medical model is still controlling the birth process, but my dream is to have a communication, to work together, doctors, midwives, moms and dads and babies, in love, peace and harmony for a better outcome. I am totally convinced of this. Where moms and dads feel if a transfer is needed from home or from a birthing center to the hospital, that we're going to be welcome and we're not going to be criticized or make feel guilty like it happened many times in Venezuela.
Our family has 5 children. First 2 are by in vitro fertilization because for medical reasons we cannot have children. After all that happened, there was a C-section, the way the first 2 children were born. Then, unexpectedly, there was another pregnancy, natural, and we went to give birth at the hospital, where we encountered violence and misunderstanding. We did everything wrong. We were the first in the city who refused to cut the umbilical cord immediately after birth. We were the first in the city to set our own requirements for our birth. At that moment, the doctor said, "Since you're so smart, why not give birth at home?" Well, that's how it happened. The 4th, a daughter, was born at home in normal, natural conditions. Finally, the youngest son who arrived in the breech delivery. Yes, I know that responsibility lies with me, and I took on that responsibility.
The question pops up, who is responsible for home birth? In fact, the responsibility is always with the parents of the child and with the mother for her own life and health. It is a myth that in hospital births, the doctor is responsible. Which doctor, even once, paid recompense to the victims in Ukraine? Even if the doctor was fired, suspended from practicing for 2 years, or reprimanded, all the consequences of cerebral palsy or the child's neuralgia will fall on the parents. Compare these degrees of responsibility. The mother is going to live with this child all her life, every day, while for a doctor it is just a tiny episode that passes very quickly. The responsibility is always on me. I do not want to give my responsibility for childbirth to a person whom I only see a few times in my life. Today, home midwives work outside the legal framework, and it's rather difficult to assign responsibility to them. If they worked legally, they would strive to obtain a higher qualification, open training and certification. They could openly analyze cases of bad outcomes and share their experiences. Their activity would be well organized, civilized, and transparent. Obviously, those midwives who have been working for a long time will no longer fit into this era. However, for young people who want to work, this is real.
It took my husband and me 5 months to register our second child born at home. Our case made the national news and mass media in 2013. It happened despite 9 visits to the prenatal clinic, medical records, having the placenta in the refrigerator, having a postpartum gynecological examination and ultrasound results, as well as breastfeeding. In the same prenatal clinic, the head of it, at my initial refusal from a free ultrasound scan, in the presence of doctors and several nurses offering me psychological and psychiatric aid. Nevertheless, we managed to get a certificate from doctors without going to court. I hope that with the legalization of home birth midwifery care, the procedure for state registration of a child will be greatly simplified. By the way, there is no such board of 11 doctors anywhere else in the world. Well, everyone should remember that in the legislation of Ukraine there is no term home birth. Here is the term birth of a child outside of a healthcare facility. That is, this birth did not occur on the territory of a medical facility. So, if a woman gave birth to her child in a store, transport, at home, at sea, and so on, in a precipitate delivery or in a planned place, then this is still the same out of hospital birth, which means that a different registration procedure is applied to it comparing to that for a hospital birth.
I would like doctors to use their qualifications and equipment for clinical, pathological childbirth, and to allow women who are not afraid of and want to give birth at home to do that, accompanied by trained home midwives. We want home birth midwives to be able to deliver natural childbirth and not be trained in pathology. We don't want a hospital at home. For teaching home birth midwifery, the training of professionals must be specific. At the same time, there's no need to reinvent the wheel. The working model of the UK, Holland, and New Zealand should be taken and implemented in Ukraine. On the other hand, home midwives of Ukraine should maintain their independence from the Ministry of Health of Ukraine and the medical attitude towards childbirth. We need an independent, professional organization that will train, certify, and supervise home midwives, as it is in developed countries. I think both extremes are dangerous. On the one hand, this is some kind of artificial enmity that is kindled between supporters of home birth and supporters of hospital birth. There should be no enmity. Both are normal. It's just that any woman's choice is explained by her medical indications, state of her health, her desires. There are pros of childbirth at home, and there are pros of hospital birth. I suppose that the government, if it does not perform punitive functions, for example persecution, but really supports women and children, should provide both options. Therefore, the midwifery care model and respect for the profession of a midwife, and accordingly for natural, gentle childbirth, are great and must be supported. In Ukraine, there is a paradox. I have the right to give birth at home. There is even a procedure for registering children born out of hospital. But I cannot receive qualified assistance for childbirth at home. There's another paradox. I want to get more qualified assistance. For example, a person with a medical education. But such a professional will bear greater legal responsibility than a person without medical education. Therefore, home midwives are forced to hide. We find them by acquaintances, by intuition, by trust. Therefore, it would be reasonable if Ukraine had a single and official registered of verified, trained, qualified home midwives. At the same time, it exists in most European countries and in the USA. This is not something innovative or weird. There will always be families who do not want their intimate act of childbirth to happen in a public place. Even a well-renovated place, even with very professional but strange people. Yes, not everyone needs this. And perhaps out of those 6% who are now giving birth at home in Ukraine, 4% will return to the hospital, if you make it a safe and high-quality hospital. But 1 to 2% will still need qualified assistance at home. I want us to be heard and our opinions to be taken into account, so that women no longer trust dabblers, and such a tragedy as what happened in the city of Rivne will never happen again.
Ukraine is one of the top 10 European countries with a declining population rate. From this point of view, Ukraine should at least not hinder people who are ready to give birth in this difficult time. Moreover, most women who prefer home birth have at least 2 children, which in modern Ukraine is unfortunately exceedingly becoming exotic.
My daughter will soon be 12 years old. She decided to give birth at home when the time is right. Therefore, I will do my best to facilitate the legalization of home birth midwifery in Ukraine before that time. We are the mothers of Ukraine. We bear and give birth to children, and it is we who are interested in the best outcomes for our births. We are the ones who are really responsible for our choice, and so we decide where to give birth, and with whom to give birth, and how to give birth. And the task of the government is to provide us with security and qualified assistance if necessary. We are mothers, and this is our manifesto.